This video has been a long time coming. So if you were around while I was posting my updates last year while I was on externship at a different VA, a different VA than I'm at this year for internship, then you may or may not recall that I spoke very briefly and very generally about some not great experiences that were happening on that externship. And I have been wanting to talk about it for so long, and I can finally talk about it because the situation is finally resolved. It is over, it is done with, it is now in the past, and there was a positive outcome, for me at least. There was a positive outcome. And if you can't already tell by the title, this situation has to do with my clinical supervisor. So I'm just going to get into it because there's really nothing else to say. Hey, hello, my name is JoJo. I really wish y'all could see the way my cat is pitched. I'm gonna take a video on my phone and I'm gonna insert it because I need y'all to see the way my cat is positioned right now in his cat tree. Just what is this? Hello? What, are you okay? What is ailing you, my little freeloader? You good? I love you. Okay. Okay, anyway. Hey, hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. I just want to say, please excuse my crusty appearance. I went to the dentist this morning to get a cavity filled, and then I came home and took a nap because then I had a headache. So here we are. But anyway, to the story. It all began. No, okay, seriously. So last year while I was on externship, things honestly started off pretty fine. The clinical supervisor that I was working with directly, so my direct supervisor, was the same person who interviewed me for the externship. And this might be way too far in the past for y'all to even remember, but I remember talking about in one of my externship match process videos, I remember talking about this interview, and I remember saying, in not these exact words, but I remember saying in one of these videos that the supervisor who interviewed me, and who would ultimately be my supervisor while I was on externship, sort of like seemed very chill, didn't really ask me many questions, just sort of asked me like very like general like interview questions, and then sort of immediately jumped into telling me about the externship and what I would be doing on externship, sort of in a way that sort of like let me know more like not officially that I was pretty likely to get the externship. And while I was very appreciative in the moment that she had such like a chill interview style, and like wasn't too rigid or formal, little did I know that this wasn't actually a chill interview style, but more so just like a general lack of investment. Just a general lack of investment in the job that she had signed up for. And this would soon make itself apparent in our supervisory relationship. So I will say generally the externship started off fine. I was showing up, I was doing my work, we were having supervisions, things were going fine. It wasn't like out of this world, like amazing, but I did really enjoy the work. I loved the veterans that I was working with. So like for that, I was willing to sort of tolerate the fact that the rest of the training experience was not exactly living up to sort of what I had hoped it would be. About, when was this? I want to say about like 2 months in, my supervisor did ask me if I was interested in co-leading 2 groups with her. She facilitated 2 Vietnam veteran support groups. And she ended up asking me like if I would be interested in co-facilitating those groups with her. I said yes, mainly because I had never done groups before. And even though it wasn't a requirement of the externship that I like run or co-lead a group, I figured I had the opportunity. This was a situation where I could sort of willingly explore what this aspect of training is like. If I didn't like it, then I would know that for, the future. Immediately upon me saying yes, she did sort of tell me that the 2 groups were very different in terms of like group dynamics. One of the groups was much more jovial, comedic, they laughed a lot. And the other group, the second group, was much more, I guess you could say like angry, in the sense that like they just had a lot of pent up frustration that often came out in conversations that happened in the group, especially when politics came up, especially when matters of like how they're treated in the VA system comes up. And to me, she said something along the lines of like, I just want to warn you, maybe I'll start you with the first group, and then if you feel comfortable with the first group, then, we can talk about adding you to the second group later. I said, sure, no problem. So I initially started off only going to one of the 2 groups, and they both happened on the same day, which was supposedly like the more jovial comedic group. And they were, for the most part. The veterans in that group were very like friendly and open to me. They like were very interested in getting to know like who I was, why I was interested in working with veterans, things like that. And after about, I want to say like a month of being in just the one group, I told my supervisor in one of our supervisory meetings that like if she feels like the second group would be open to it, that I would like to sit in at least once on the second group, and then like, continue to like co-facilitate the group with her, if that was something that they were okay with. She said she would ask them, and then she would let me know the following week. The week goes by, she comes back and she tells me, yeah, they said they're cool with it. No problem. I said, great. So then the following week is when I started going to both groups. So this, at this point, would have been like sometime in October, maybe closer to like the end of October. So for those first few months, things were, again, fine. The groups were fine. The first group, I did notice, I felt a little unsure about sort of the role my supervisor had in the first group, because with that group in particular, it did feel more like they just sort of came in and like they would spend the hour like shooting the shit, like legitimately like shooting the shit. Like they would talk about just like random stuff that was going on in their day-to-day lives. And then like occasionally we would talk about like specifically like war related experiences and memories and how those memories were still impacting them. And also occasionally we would talk about like more serious matters that were happening in their day-to-day lives. But the vast majority of the time they was just shooting the shit, and my supervisor was sort of just like letting that happen. And so like I was sort of just like taking her lead on things. But to me, off rip, the atmosphere in that first group felt less like they're coming here for support with their war related experiences and more like this is just another space for them to gather and like socialize. With the second group, she was definitely right in that like the group dynamic is much different. They're much more angry and frustrated generally, not necessarily towards her, but just about life. Like they are just much more discontented with life, and often spoke much more frequently than the first group did about political matters. And when that would come up, I would notice that my supervisor would really take a seat, like a back seat in the conversations. She almost completely disappeared when conversations about politics would come up in the groups, in both groups, but in particular this second group. And again, because this was a group that she had been running for so long already, and I was sort of just like the trainee coming in, I really like sort of followed her lead initially, because I was also still sort of trying to get my bearings of the groups and understand the dynamics and understand sort of where I could fit in the dynamics that were already present. Also trying to understand like how the groups were responding to me as not only a trainee, but also a trainee of color and also a woman trainee of color. Like all of these things were coming in because these groups were like predominantly white. So that was how the first few months of being in these groups went. November rolls around, and this was sort of when the first incident occurred that really did not sit right with me in terms of how my supervisor was handling things that concerned me. I don't know why I said it like that. That's a weird way to phrase it. But in matters that concerned me as a trainee and my safety and my level of comfort, this was the first incident that occurred that let me know that my supervisor just like was not going to protect me as a trainee. So November rolls around. I'm planning to go on a trip for my birthday, which means that there was going to be a week where I was not going to be present because I was taking a very long weekend. But the week prior to my trip, we were in group, and there was a moment in group where sort of like several different conversations were happening at once amongst like the group members and my supervisor and myself. So like my supervisor was talking to one of the vets who was also sort of talking to like two of the other vets, a couple of vets in the middle of the little semicircle thing, were having like an independent conversation. And then I was sort of talking to the vets that were sitting to my right. In the midst of the conversation, I hear a veteran to my left, one of the veterans that my supervisor is speaking to, make a comment related to me. And so I look over then to their conversation and try to tune into what they're saying. And once I finally tune into the conversation, I realize that they're not talking about me directly, but more so women more broadly, including my supervisor, because the veteran is talking about his wife. I'm not even gonna lie, I can't fully remember what was said immediately prior to the comment I'm about to mention, but one veteran said something to me. But then another veteran in that moment, immediately following that comment, made a joke. And I want to say that this veteran was a veteran who was not a part of like this smaller branch of conversation, but he was one of the veterans who was speaking to like a small group in the middle. And I think he just happened to overhear and it pulled his attention. But immediately following whatever the first veteran said to me, the second veteran jumps in and made a fat joke about me. I'm not going to repeat what the joke was because it was very offensive. But in the moment, I was stunned that he would say something like that. Not just generally, but within earshot of me. Like he looked at me and knew that I heard him. And he's laughing. In the moment, no one else is reacting to what he says. Like no one else even looked up from the conversations they were having, including my supervisor and the group of veterans that she had been speaking to and who I had been listening to. They kept going with their conversation. So because of that, I assumed that no one else but me had heard this veteran's comment about me. And so I just sort of laughed it off, looked down for a second to compose myself, and then returned to the original group of veterans I was having a conversation with. At some point, the conversation sort of becomes one big group conversation again, and then group ends very shortly after that. I go back to my office. I have supervision with my supervisor, in which she does not even bring up this comment whatsoever. And then I go about the rest of my day and I leave. Following week goes by. I come back the week after, so it's now been 2 weeks since that group happened. The first group, the group in which this comment was made, I'm sort of dreading it, but I go. And as soon as the veteran who made the joke, who made the fat joke, walks in, he sees me and he calls out my name, and I call out his name and I'm like, "Good morning." And he apologizes to me in the best way he knows how, but he does apologize to me. In his apology to me, he lets me know that he got in trouble. I didn't know what he meant by that, but he was like, "Yeah, I really got in trouble. I'm so sorry, for what I said." And I let him know, all right, I appreciate your apology. Thank you. And then we just went on with the rest of the group. Then the second group of the day, again, this would have been the more discontented, more political of the two groups. Being that this was November, these groups are also happening immediately post-election. And so that group ends up getting very political that day. They were just saying some really off-the-wall shit about, the, at the time, president-elect, and how they felt he was going to change the country for the better, and things he might do to achieve that. And in the midst of that conversation, they were just saying some sort of really hateful things about other groups of people. And they were occasionally throwing out some slurs. And every time a slur would get said, I would look to my supervisor, who was just sitting back and sort of not really saying anything. Again, she really disappeared in these political conversations. She was just not saying anything. And so because she wasn't saying anything, I was like, well, I can't say anything, especially not as the Black woman in the room. I can't say anything. So that group also goes by. Supervision happens that day. And I am like so just like incensed about the things that were said in the second group that I don't even talk about that group with her immediately. I just start with the first group and the veteran who apologized to me. And when I asked her about what had happened the week prior, because he had also alluded to the fact that like he wanted to apologize to me the week prior, but I wasn't there. And so he felt really, really bad because he thought I wasn't there because of what he had said to me. And then it was my supervisor who let him know, like, no, she's just on vacation. But when I asked her about that, she was like, yeah, man, like after he made that comment, like we were all so upset with him. And I'm like, I'm experiencing like a lot of confusion because I'm remembering and I'm like, who was upset with him? Because no one else seemed to have heard anything. But she goes on to say that this particular, hi baby, this particular group often, okay, hi. This particular group, they often went out after a group to get breakfast together. And so according to my supervisor, when they went out for breakfast that morning, per what they reported upon return the following week, the week I was not there, when they all went out for breakfast that day after group, they all yelled at the veteran who made the fat joke about me. And because they all got mad at him for it, he then I think had an individual session with my supervisor earlier in that week, who sort of like co-signed them and was like, yeah, man, you really messed up. Like, you don't say something like that. And that was sort of the catalyst for his desire to say sorry to me. Again, because I wasn't there that week, he couldn't apologize, and my supervisor said that he felt really badly that he couldn't apologize to me. So that was sort of like her explanation of what had happened. I felt so deeply confused because, and I shared this with her, I said, okay, that's really shocking for me to hear, because in the moment when he said it, no one reacted, so I assumed no one heard it, including you. And she admitted to me that she had heard it. And so then I'm taken aback, like, okay, so then why the fuck didn't you say anything? Like, if you heard him say that to me and it upset you and you knew that it wasn't okay, why didn't you say anything in the moment? Why did you make me feel like I was so alone in that moment? I didn't say any of that to her, but that's what I'm thinking. So I'm like, okay, well, I appreciate that he apologized, you know. And then she goes on to, I think in an effort to make me feel less badly about the comment being made, she then goes on to not necessarily disparage the veteran, but sort of say like, oh, he means really well. Sometimes he just doesn't think before he speaks. He just blurts out whatever is on his mind. She starts sort of trying to make a joke about how he's a little slow, how he's not exactly the smartest guy in the world, you know? She starts like sort of trying to say he's just like the lovable idiot, essentially. He's just the lovable idiot who doesn't think before he speaks. Never mind how problematic that is. But all of this, I feel like, was being said in an effort to try to make me feel less badly. I, at that point, am just like, okay, I want this conversation generally to be over. So I'm like, yeah, it's cool, whatever. I understand. Let's move on. We start talking about the second group. And I start to say to her, like, wow, the group was really angry today. And she said, yeah, like she was like, I knew that, you know, when the election came, no matter what the outcome was, this was going to be a possibility, that they were going to be really worked up about whatever the results were, whether they were in their favor or not. And I said, okay, like, well, yeah, they said some pretty wild stuff today in group. And she was like, ugh, I know. And when they say those things, like, I just feel like, you know, like, does it even make sense to like try to correct them? She was like, I've tried to correct them so many times before. She was referring specifically to the slurs. She was like, I hate when they use those terms, and I've tried to correct them so many times before and let them know like why those things aren't okay for them to say, but like they're just so old and they're stuck in their ways. And so I just wonder, like, does it even make sense to try to correct them anymore? And I'm sitting there looking at her like, you can't be fucking serious. Like, you're not serious. You're not serious. But she absolutely was. And I then decide to ask her, you know, like how they have responded in the past to when she has tried to correct them. And she doesn't really answer my question. She just sort of repeats herself and says, you know, she has explained to them why it's not okay to use certain terms anymore. She has told them over and over again, and it just doesn't stick. And I'm just like, okay. At this point, I just really want the supervision to be over. So I'm just like, all right, I let it go there. I decide not to pursue it anymore. That was the first incident. Okay. Over the course of the next few months, so from the end of November through probably like February, March-ish, the groups continue on. I still continue to attend both groups, and the first group, for the most part, goes well, with the occasional sort of like weird, unsettling joke, like regarding the one veteran who made the fat joke about me. It sort of turns into an ongoing, like a running like joke that he is just, you know, this idiot who has no filter. And, you know, every time he like says something that could be interpreted negatively, the whole group starts to make a joke about how he's like, his filter isn't on. And then they look at me and they start laughing. And so then I begin to wonder, like, do they actually not think anything he's saying is wrong, and rather they're making these jokes at my expense, as if like I'm sort of like the politically correct police, you know? I know I don't say any of that to my supervisor during this time, but I'm just noticing that these things are like reoccurring, right? And then in the second group, again, sort of in the wake of all of this political strife that is happening, you know, the election happens in November, the inauguration happens in January, Orange Man's first, 100 days in office is underway, and so politics is coming up almost every meeting, and almost every meeting, the veterans are saying some really off the wall shit that just really does not sit right with me. And every single time, my supervisor just does not say anything. She does not make an effort to correct them. She does not make an effort to intervene. And they're also now in these conversations making it a point to also acknowledge to some degree how like not really racist they are. And like every time they say the word black or black person, they like look at me and gesture to me as if I don't know that I'm black. Or as if to say like, look, I'm talking about your people, and it's just really fucked up. And they're continuing to speak very disparagingly about minoritized groups, and they're making just unnecessary and very much incorrect claims about these groups. And my supervisor is just sort of letting it all happen. So finally, in one of our supervisions in March, I decide to ask my supervisor directly in supervision if she felt like my being Black had in any way, shape, or form altered the dynamics of either group. And immediately she gets super uncomfortable. I also want to say that within the VA system itself, if you weren't aware, during these first few months of the new presidential administration, that's the word, during these first few months in the new administration, within the VA system itself, there were a lot of really scary changes happening. That often meant that in team meetings, politics were being talked about a lot, and people were getting visibly upset and emotional over the changes that were happening within the VA system. And again, in these team meetings, which were happening virtually, my supervisor would mute herself, turn her camera off, and just not participate in the meetings. And there was one day in particular where I ran into her in the office after one of these team meetings happened, in which she muted herself and turned her camera off. And she sort of came to me and was like, oh my God, that meeting, like, I just couldn't do it. I really don't think we're supposed to be talking about politics in these team meetings. Like, I think that's against VA rules. And I'm just sitting there listening to her, and I'm nodding my head. And in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, but we're not just talking about politics for shits and giggles. Like, we're talking about politics because politically what's happening right now is directly impacting people's jobs here. Like, people are losing their jobs and people are being harmed here because of what's currently happening politically. And like, people are scared. Like, we're not just talking about politics for funsies, but of course you're going to feel like we shouldn't be talking about these things because none of what's happening right now is impacting you directly. So when I had directly asked her in one of our supervisions if she felt like my presence in the groups, and specifically my identities being a Black woman in the groups, had impacted the group dynamics at all. Like, what were the group dynamics like before? And we obviously were seeing what they were now. So I wanted to know what, if anything, had shifted. And essentially what she did was justify, excuse, and gaslight me. She said, everything that they're saying in the groups now, she thinks they would say even if I wasn't there, which isn't any sort of argument, because all that means is that they're not hiding their racism. But she was like, I think everything they're saying now, they would say if another student who wasn't Black was there, they would still be saying it, And then she started talking about how, before I got there, they would say really, problematic things about women who were educated. And she would be sitting there like, hello, I am a highly educated woman with a PhD sitting in front of you. Like, how are you saying these things while I'm sitting here? And she used that as sort of like see, it's not just about the fact that you're Black. They also just hate women. Again, is not a sound argument, but in her mind it was. And then the gaslighting, which was, I actually think they really like you. I think they really do like having you in the group, and they really do like talking to you, and they really appreciate how much care you show them. I really don't think that it has anything to do with the fact that you're Black. Be so for real. Like, like be so for real. That was now my second attempt at having a very honest conversation with her about the fact that things that were being said in the group were not okay. And she, again, acknowledged, yes, things that are being said are not okay. And what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do? We can't do anything. And then, as she did the first time, rather than talking about, okay, so then how can we make this space, or how can we improve this space, and how can we address this within the groups, rather than talking about that, she again resorts to sort of like just talking kind of, again, not like disparagingly, but in a sort of like, they're the lovable old problematic men. And she's like, they grew up in a different time and the generation, and all of the just like old rhetoric that people resort to when trying to excuse problematic behavior. I should also note, I don't know how I didn't say this initially. I'm sure you all have probably gathered as much from context clues, or at least understood generally. But I will just say very plainly, my supervisor was a middle-aged white Italian woman. Okay. So this second attempt at a conversation happens at this point in my externship year. And again, if you sort of go back to my update videos from last year, you'll see that like over time, I become less and less excited about talking about externship specifically, because this is what I was dealing with. It was just sort of like ongoing, and I, over the weeks, like week after week, just wanted to show up less and less because of what was happening. Both what was happening in the world and also how that was showing up in my workplace. So another couple of weeks go by. I'm in one of these groups, the second group to be specific, and things get political again. I think this might have been, oh my God, this all seems like a blur, but I think this might have been around one of the many times when the Orange Man made a speech or something and said something like really egregious about the Latinx community. As a result, the conversation in group this day turned to like freedom of speech and the use of language and what is like politically correct. And the group got really riled up this day, like really riled up. And at some point in the conversation, again, slurs just started flying. Including the N-word. And again, my supervisor says nothing. I look at her while this conversation is happening, and she says nothing. She also like doesn't even look at me in the group this day. She does not even turn her face to look at me, and we usually sat right next to each other. Does not even turn to look at me this day. At this point, I've had it. I go silent for the rest of the group. I say nothing. Group ends. I don't even say goodbye to any of the veterans. I don't say anything to my supervisor. I walk out, I walk back to my office, and I close my door, and I just sit there and I breathe in silence for like 30 minutes. It's time for supervision. Usually my supervisor is a couple minutes early, if not a few minutes early, like 5 minutes early for supervision every week. And she usually comes, knocks on my door, comes in and sits down. This time she is not early, nor is she on time. My supervisor walks into my office 10 minutes late for supervision. She just sits down and she starts talking, and I'm just sort of like telling her like, yeah, I'm tired. That's all I really say to her. And she's like, yeah, I understand. Like, You know, she's thinking that I'm saying I'm tired in terms of like, as a student, I am tired. So when I recognize that she thinks that that's what I'm talking about, I then say further, you know, it's getting really hard to be in the groups. And that's when she sort of picks up on what she picks up on what I'm putting down. Okay. She picks up on what I'm putting down, but she doesn't grab it. Okay. She doesn't hold on to it. She just sort of, again, begins to say, oh my God, yeah, like group was a lot today. And again, make excuses for her allowing them to use these slurs. And again, resorts to this. She has tried so many times to correct them. They are so old. They are so stuck in their ways. Does it even make sense to try to correct them anymore? And I am so checked out in this moment that I'm just sitting there like agreeing with her. I'm like, yeah, yep, you're right. Like I truly don't remember anything else about that supervision meeting because I fully checked out. The following day, my externship, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but my externship had us, had the externs do a weekly process group. That happened on the day after this thing happened. And so in that process group, I bring up everything that had happened up until this point in my externship experience with my supervisor. And everyone is absolutely like disgusted. And they're all being like really supportive, and they're telling me like, this is absolutely worthy of bringing to the training directors. Like you really should talk to them about this. And so I decide that I'm going to. And so I emailed the training directors, both of them, and I set up a meeting with them for the following week. And I tell them everything that had happened, including the most recent incident with the N-word being used in the group, in one of the groups. I tell them about the fat joke. I tell them about just like continuous disparaging of minoritized groups, the hateful language being used in the groups. I tell them about how my supervisor just sort of disappears in all of this and doesn't say anything. And they too are disgusted. And so we sort of like brainstorm, and they're asking me like, what is it I want to do? And I'm telling them that like, ideally I would like to have a conversation with her, but I have tried to have conversations with her and she just doesn't seem to be getting it. And essentially what they tell me is they encourage me to try to have a conversation with her one more time, and to this time just be very frank with my supervisor about everything that I'm telling them and how I feel, and try to work with my supervisor to find some sort of resolution about how to engage the groups going forward. I say okay, and I tell them that I'm going to check in with them after I have the conversation. Little did I know, again, that once again, I would be the butt of a joke. So sometime in early April, I took another day off. I don't exactly remember what for. I'm not gonna lie. Nope, I'm lying. I was sick. I got really sick in April. This was around the time between like March to like May. I was sick a lot last year. Or that would have been earlier this year. Jesus, what is time? That would have been earlier this year. Yeah, between like March to May, I was sick a lot. And so this particular day in April, I called out of work. When I came back the following week, again, in the first group, the same veteran who made the fat joke about me all the way back in November, walks in and he sees me and he yells my name again. That was like how he liked to greet me for some reason. He yells my name. I yell his name. I say good morning. He's like, "You weren't here last week." And I was like, "Yeah, I wasn't. I was sick." And he was like, "Oh, the rest of the guys are going to be really happy that you're here." And I was like, "Okay." And then the rest of the group falls in and they're all also greeting me in this way. They're all like, "Oh my God, you're here." And they're all really excited that I'm here. And I don't know why. I'm just like, "Oh my God, like, did you guys actually miss me? Like, I was sick. I'm so sorry that I missed a group." And when they all sit down, I sort of asked him, I'm like, "What did I miss last week? Like, what?" And they were like, "No, you weren't here last week and so missed you." And they're referring to the veteran who made the fat joke about me back in November. I was just like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And we continue on with the group. That day in supervision, I asked my supervisor what I had missed the week prior, because what in the world? And she proceeds to tell me that I still laugh when I think about this, because it's so just like ridiculous to me that this would have been said in front of her and she wouldn't have said anything. She proceeds to tell me that in the group the previous week when I was sick, when I was out, they had walked in and they were all really disappointed that I was not there that day. And when she asked them why they were upset I wasn't there, they told her it was because they had made a bet, a real cash money bet, about how long it would take the one veteran who made the fat joke about me. They made a bet about how long it would take for him to say something offensive to me that day in group. And this was not a joke, okay? This was a real bet that they had all put money on. And because I wasn't there, they were upset that they all lost the bet. And she said this to me as if it was no big deal. And I was so caught off guard by how she was telling me this with the straightest face, as if there was nothing wrong with what she had just said to me. She even laughed about it. I completely forgot that I was supposed to have another conversation with her that day. I just sort of laughed it off with her, and we had the rest of our supervision. At this point in supervision also, I'm no longer really talking about my cases with her, because she also at this point just felt so unhelpful clinically as a supervisor. Like, nothing she would say to me about my cases ever felt helpful. And so I just stopped really asking her for help with my cases and was more so sort of just giving her updates about where I was with all of my cases and what we were talking about. And that was it. So we had the rest of our supervision, and I immediately reached back out to the training directors and I said, "I need to tell y'all something else." I had another meeting with them. I told them about this particular thing, and they were like, "Okay, yeah, like, you tell us what you want to do. Do you want us to be there when you have a conversation with her? Do you want us to speak to her on our own without you there?" And as much as I would have loved to have just like removed myself from the equation and let them speak with her, I was really worried about the fact that I was still going to have to work with her for at least another month and a half at this point, because it was now the middle of April. I was still going to have to work with her for at least another month and a half. If I had them speak to her alone without me, it would have seemed as if I had just sort of like went over her head and like tried to get her in trouble, which I didn't want to happen, because I didn't want it to result in like her feeling any sort of way towards me while I was still working with her. So I told them that I was going to, or I didn't tell them, this was the sort of solution we came up with together, was that I was going to send her an email to let her know that the next supervision meeting I had something I wanted to talk to her about. So I did exactly that. I sent her an email that very simply said, hey, in our next meeting, I would really appreciate it if we set aside some time to talk about how I've been feeling about the groups. She responded, she said, okay. And then she said also, like, if there's anything you want to talk about before supervision next week, let me know. I ignored it, didn't answer her. Our next supervision meeting comes and she stalls. She does everything she can to stall talking about what I want to talk about. She came into the supervision, sat down, and immediately started talking about all these other things that we really did not need to discuss in that meeting. Like, there were things about like emails that had gone out and conversations that were happening amongst admin that pertained to the externs, but like I didn't really need to know in that moment because nothing had been decided yet. This was around the time when like the return to work mandate was like return to office mandate at this time was just now like being finalized in terms of like the externs, because for a while there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not the return to office mandate applied to the externs. Finally, around this time, it had been sort of looking like it would apply to us. And so she was talking about like office space and all of that. Again, none of this was anything that really needed to be talked about in this exact meeting. Like in this meeting, this particular meeting where I had let her know that I had something I wanted to talk to her about, none of this that she was bringing needed to be discussed in this very meeting. But I knew immediately that she was stalling. I let her stall because, again, at this point I was checked out. I'm not gonna lie. I was trying to have this conversation with her for the sake of professional development, and like I need to not shy away from having these conversations with people, especially supervisors. But at the same time, I was checked out. So when I noticed that she was stalling, I just let her stall. And finally, in like the last 10 minutes of our supervision, she's like, okay, so I know you said you wanted to talk about something with the groups. And I'm like, all right. So I told her straight up. I said, listen, I said it in a much more like professional tone than this, I should add. But I can't even bring myself to sort of go back there and think about exactly how I said this. But I told her straight up, I said, listen, things that are being said in the group, I am not okay with. They don't sit well with me. They are very problematic. They're using slurs, and I don't think it's okay. And I think going forward, we need to find a way of engaging with the group that doesn't necessarily like try to change who they are fundamentally, because that's not going to happen, at least not in this current moment and in this current political climate. But we do, as clinicians, need to find a way of at least helping them begin to reflect on why they use this language, especially in the presence of a person of color. There was also a group session in like the prior weeks leading up to this that one of the group members in the first group is also a person of color. He's Latinx. And I noticed in one of the previous groups that he had gotten really upset over a xenophobic comment that was made by another group member. And again, this went unaddressed. So I also brought that in, and I was like, it's not just affecting me, it's also affecting other group members. And I gave her the example of what I had noticed in the weeks prior. And she was sort of like agreeing with me. She was like, absolutely, like yes, what they're saying is not okay. I understand why you're uncomfortable. And then she again sort of resorted to this rhetoric of, but I really don't think it's you. I think this is just how they speak. And then this was a new thing that she added. She said, I really think part of why the group is so important to them is because they all share political values. And I think that's really important for them in order to connect. And so now I'm like, so you're saying that it's okay for them to be xenophobic and it's okay for them to be racist because it's the way in which they connect with one another? I didn't actually ask her this, but this is what's the commentary that was going on in my head. I was like, she can't be serious. Now she's excusing it because it's how they connect with one another. I again asked her in this meeting, I said, does she think my being Black has had an impact on the group? And this time what she said to me was, I did think about how they would react to you. She's saying like before I started attending the groups at all, like all the way back in like August and September. She said, I did think about how they would respond to you. And I was worried about it. And here I am thinking she's about to like actually validate that my experiences in the group have been racially motivated. But instead, she again says, but I think they really like you. I really do think they like you. And I think they've really liked having you there. And, I really don't think that, anything has been different because you're Black. So I leave that part alone. I said, I'm not going to let her sit here and invalidate me anymore. So I leave that part alone and I just go back to, all right, so what are we going to do moving forward? How can we engage with the groups going forward in a way that, makes the space feel less toxic, essentially? And she's just sort of like, yeah, that's something that we should think about. Doesn't say anything. So now I'm like, all right, clearly I have to be the supervisor here. Clearly the roles have been reversed. I am the supervisor. She is the supervisee. And so I proposed to her that anytime hateful language is used going forward, we just take a moment to stop the conversation and reflect on what was just said and ask the group or ask the member why they said what they said. That's it. We don't have to chastise them. We don't have to correct them. Simply, all I'm asking for is that when something hateful is said, we pause the conversation and we say, hey guys, what was that? What were you feeling in that moment? Why did those words leave your mouth? That's it. Just try to get them to reflect. That's it. And she said, yeah, we can do that. And I said, cool. And also, when that happens, it can't just be me trying to interject because I am the trainee. You are the supervisor. You have been working with them for years. So as long as I have your support in this, I feel like this can be done. She again says, yeah, I agree. I think that's a good move. Let's do that. I said, great. Do y'all think that happened? The answer is no. No, it did not. Because the very next week, a slur was once again used. And my supervisor said nothing. And I tried to interject. And they just continued to speak over me. And my supervisor said nothing. And then in supervision that day, she pointed out to me that she saw that I was trying to speak and that they weren't letting me speak. And in my mind, I said, you dumb, so why didn't you help me? And it was at this point that I said, F this shit. I'm just trying to get through the rest of this year. And I said, I tried. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to keep it pushing, and I'm going to finish out this externship and get the out of here. Because I was over it. I was fed up. I was tired. I was exhausted. I was drained. I no longer wanted to be there. I dreaded going to work every week. I dreaded it. I did not want to be there anymore. And so I didn't even follow up with the training directors. They actually ended up reaching out to me what had come of the conversation I had with my supervisor. And I just told them, I said, hey, I tried. She invalidated me. She did not support me. We had agreed on X, Y, and Z. She did not follow through. I'm done. I told them, I'm just trying to get through the rest of this externship. There's nothing more I can do. I just want to be done. And they were like, totally valid. We hear you. And that was sort of it. That was where we left things off with that. And I could also say a lot about the way the training directors handled it, but I don't even have the energy for that at this point. I'm getting exhausted just talking about this and telling this story. I didn't realize how worked up I was going to get about it again. So the end of the externship comes. We have to fill out evaluations for our supervisors. And one of the categories or dimensions in which we evaluate our supervisors is within matters of diversity, equity, inclusion, culture, all of that stuff. And I was very honest in my evaluation of my supervisor. I rated her, I would say, relatively okay in every other area. I believe the scale was on a scale of 1 to 5 for each, you know what I'm trying to say. The scale was 1 to 5. 3 was like in the middle, right? Yeah. That was embarrassing. Hi, I'm JoJo and I'm getting a PhD, but I still needed to use my fingers to make sure that 3 was in the middle of 1 and 5. Oh God. Okay, anyway. Yeah, I rated her pretty much 3s across the board, which isn't terrible, you know? It's just sort of like, hey, you did what you were supposed to do. And she did, for the most part. She did what she was supposed to do. She did the bare fucking minimum, okay? She did the bare minimum. The only area in which I rated her below a 3 was the questions related to diversity, which I think I was completely warranted in doing. And then in the final portion of the evaluation, there is a qualitative response box where you can type in a response, basically contextualizing your ratings above. And so I did that. And the very first sentence of my response in that box was, working with my supervisor's name was a positive experience for the most part. And following that sentence, I wrote every positive aspect of our supervisions, which, to be honest, was not many, but I did list them. I did list the parts of our supervisions that I thought were helpful. I might have pulled a couple of things out my ass, but positivity was there, okay? It was there. I then went on to describe why I gave her the ratings on diversity issues. All I said was, when it came to matters of race and ethnicity, I felt very unsupported by my supervisor. And I do wish that she would have been more open to engaging in these sorts of conversations with me. And I also said, I do think she would benefit from having additional trainings on how to navigate these matters, both in supervisory and clinical encounters going forward. And then I sort of sandwiched that with a final positive comment about my experience with her, whatever. One of the unfortunate parts of these evaluations is that we are not allowed to just submit them to the training directors. We have to submit them to our supervisors, and our supervisors we are supposed to have a conversation with our supervisors about these evaluations. Unfortunately, because of the way the end of the externship was set up, my last week in the office was not going to be with my supervisor was not going to be there, because even though I worked under the larger umbrella hospital for this VA, me and my supervisor were primarily located at like a satellite clinic. And for that last week of the externship, I wasn't going to be at that satellite clinic. I was going to be at the main hospital because that's where the training directors wanted everyone to be. I completely forgot about that. So when I sent off my evaluation to my supervisor, I forgot that we weren't going to be able to meet that final week to talk about it. So essentially what it looked like to her was that I sent her the evaluation knowing that I was never going to have a conversation with her about it, when in all reality, I just simply forgot. I forgot that I wasn't going to be at the clinic that final week and I was actually going to be at the main hospital. That's all it was. Do I understand how to her that could have looked like I was just being a petty who just sent her this really bad evaluation, which wasn't really bad, but for her, she interpreted it as being really bad. But can I see how it could have looked like I was just being petty and I just sent her this terrible evaluation and that was going to be it? Yes, absolutely. Truth is, I just forgot because I stopped caring about the externship at this point. That's what it was. So anyway, because of that situation, I actually did not end up having a conversation with my supervisor about her evaluation. I just sent it to her. And then that final week when I was at the main hospital, I actually also was not able to give it to the training directors because on the last day of the externship, the IT people prematurely revoked my access. And so I was at the hospital all day and was not able to get on any of the computers. I was not able to access my VA email. I was not able to even log in to the computers. So I was not able to, one, see if my supervisor had responded to the evaluation that I emailed her, and two, I was not able to give it to the training directors. So I essentially ended the externship just sort of in the ether with that evaluation. About a month later, so this is now June, my supervisor receives the evaluation from my school that she has to fill out for me. And she had already done one mid-year. She had already done one in January for my mid-year evaluation, in which she rated me highly on every single thing. Across the board, she rated me highly on everything. No questions asked. We didn't even talk about it. She just came in one day. She was like, yeah, I did your evaluation. You're doing great. I don't know if she was aware of this, but when our evaluations are done in my program, they are shared with us. We can read them. Prior to her filling out my evaluation, she had emailed our program coordinator and said, hey, just so you know, JoJo, she said my full name, JoJo has already ended her externship, so I was not able to talk to her about it, or have any sort of conversation with her about the eval. I didn't realize at this point that she was being petty. Mind you, I'm CC'd on these emails. She was being petty. My program coordinator said, no problem, just send it whenever you finish it. She finished the eval, she sent it to the program coordinator. The program coordinator then sent it to me, and would you believe this rated me low on almost every metric? On almost every metric on which she had previously in the mid-year evaluation rated me a 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, she rated me a 2 almost across the board, including the questions related to diversity, i.e. questions like, is the student able to understand that people come from different cultural backgrounds and how that could impact clinical work? She rated me 2s across the board. And then again, in that little final box where you're able to contextualize the ratings that you give, she's actually, I'm gonna read it to you. I'm gonna read it to you because this shit blew my mind when I saw it. Hold up. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna pull it up right now. It was insane. Okay, are you ready for this? She said, anytime I say JoJo, just know that she wrote my actual name. What she said was, JoJo began with a strong start and seemed to be eager to learn. As the externship progressed, she appeared to shut down and often came to supervision with little to explore or discuss. She appeared to be struggling with some of the content in the groups she co-led with me. When asked if she wanted to explore, her answers were often brief, and she seemed disappointed. On her way out of externship, she offered some negative feedback about her experience with supervision, but it was done in the form of an eval that was emailed after our last supervision meeting, which did not allow for us to process together. Her feedback was surprising in that she had ample opportunity to discuss her feelings during our weekly meetings, but did not. I would have liked to have the opportunity to address these concerns if I had been made aware of them sooner than her last day of externship, so that they could have been rectified. It was, in my opinion, a demonstration of her lack of desire to address directly with me her feelings. I would hope that she is more forthcoming with her future supervisors so that a more effective learning environment can be fostered. I think it is also important for professional development to be direct with feedback and open to engaging in a conversation about it. Are you not a grown woman? I'm sorry. Are you not a grown woman in your 50s? Maybe late 40s? I don't know. I never really knew how old she was. But are you not a grown woman? Are we not grown women? Are you really retaliating against me right now because you feel slighted? Not only are you retaliating against me because you feel slighted, but you're lying. You lied because I had conversations with you. I tried to have conversations with you on multiple occasions. I was livid. I immediately emailed the program coordinator back and told her, this is retaliation and I need to know who to talk to file a formal complaint against her. And I did. I filed a formal complaint against her for retaliation because that's exactly what she did. I emailed my DCT, I emailed my ADCT, I emailed our program coordinator, and I emailed the training directors of the externship. And I screenshotted the evaluation and I sent it to them. And then I had a meeting with them telling them that this was ridiculous, and they agreed. And thus began the process of trying to rectify the situation, because these evaluations have a direct impact on whether or not I can graduate. If I am in my 4th year of training, about to go into my 5th and final year of training and internship, and that is the type of evaluation I'm receiving, I'm not going to be allowed to graduate. So when I spoke to my DCT, or rather I spoke to my ADCT about this, and she went back in my records and she said, absolutely, this is clearly retaliation, and we're going to get this figured out. I connected her with the training directors of the externship. They had conversations behind the scenes that didn't involve me. All I know is that I just got an email a couple of days ago from my ADCT letting me know that they made my supervisor resubmit my eval and it was corrected. It sure was. It sure was. They made redo my eval. And you know what? She had nothing but good things to say about me this time. So yeah. All that to say, the tried to retaliate against me for her own racism. And I have learned nothing else if not how much I need to stand up for myself as a Black woman in this field. And I was not about to let that shit slide. I could not, I could not believe, but I couldn't believe that this really tried to keep me from graduating. She really tried to keep me from graduating. But yeah, this was by far the worst supervision experience ever. She is the worst clinical supervisor I've ever come into contact with. I do know, unfortunately, that she is supervising another student this year. However, I do also know the identity of the student she is supervising this year, and I can almost guarantee you they are probably having a much better relationship than she and I did because they are much more aligned in their identities. So yeah, that is the story of the worst supervisor I've ever had. I think based on my last conversation with the training directors, I do think she is no longer running either of those groups. Essentially, what the training directors communicated to me was that it didn't seem to them that there was any benefit to continuing those two groups, which to an extent they are right. Like in the whole year that I was co-leading those groups with her, I continuously questioned what the point of the groups was because we were not talking about military related experiences. We were a lot of the times talking about this problematic shit is what was coming up all the time. And though I understand the importance for veterans to have spaces like this in which they can just sort of connect, they had that outside of the groups. Like all of them had each other's numbers. All of them hung out with each other outside of the group meetings. And so like, if the group was just going to be another space for them to socialize, like they didn't need that. They really didn't need that. So it felt a little bittersweet in the sense that like, I was sad that like they were going to be losing this space, but also like, yeah, they didn't need it. This is not a space they needed for the purposes that they were using it for. Like they can continue to go get breakfast together. They can continue to golf together and talk all this shit out in the world. Okay. Like they don't need a group for that. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that's what ended up happening, but that was sort of what was communicated to me, was that like these groups were no longer going to be in existence, at least for my supervisor. Or if they were, she was not going to be the one leading them anymore, which I think was the right choice. Really, I share this story. I know I've made a lot of jokes in order to try to get through this, but really I'm sharing this story because this is really like not something that I ever thought I was going to experience in my time in my program. Like I've dealt with like microaggressions and like more subtle forms of racism, but never never in a million years did I think that I was going to have to report someone for retaliation against me in this way. Again, this is just another example of like how, despite how much progress people would like you to think has been made in the clinical psychology field, there is still so much more work that needs to be done. And it is absolutely disgusting how some people behave. For those of you who are considering or might even be applying to clinical psych programs this year, I do want to say that I hope this doesn't deter you in any way. I never share these experiences with the hope of like deterring people from chasing their dreams. Like, if this is something that you really want to do and you are committed to this work, then by all means, like, do it, and do it well, and do it in spite of all the bullshit. But just know that like these are definitely challenges that are going to come up for you in some way, shape, or form. They might not be in the exact form that I'm experiencing them, but just know that like you will have these challenges, and they are not easy. So just like make sure that you build a support network and you have people in your corner who are willing to fight for you. And I am so grateful in this instance for my ADCT, who was able to recognize that this evaluation was not at all indicative of who she knows me to be and the clinician she knows me to be. And she heard my story, and she 1000% supported me, and handled the situation swiftly, and stood up for me. And yeah, but all that to say, these people. Anyway, I feel like I've been recording for a really long time. How long has it been? I've been recording for like an hour and a half. I think. Maybe. Yeah, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. Let me know down in the comments if you are in a training program. Like, is this something that you've dealt with, and how have you dealt with it? And for those of you who aren't in programs but maybe are considering programs, how might you have handled this situation? I'm eager to know. So yeah, as always, like, share, and subscribe, and click that little notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. And I'll see you in my next one.